And we're back here with day 6, and today we're actually jumping into Photoshop. This is where we're going to start in Photoshop, getting everything set up for efficiency. Now you might think that's crazy, but Photoshop is a convoluted beast. There's a lot of things in here. So today on day 6, we're just going to take a look at the interface and get you set up with the workspace that will help you with efficiency from here all the way throughout the rest of your journey in Photoshop. Okay, this is actually pretty exciting stuff. It might seem like the most boring thing you're ever going to learn, but I guarantee you're going to thank me for this because I taught this once at a live workshop, and a gentleman comes up to me and says, you know what? I've been in Photoshop for 15 years. 15 years. And I thought that this lesson that you taught was going to be the stupidest thing I've ever seen. And guess what? I'm converted. I love it. I'm going to go home. I can't wait to get home actually so that I can set up Photoshop for efficiency. So if you don't think that this is going to be helpful, take it from that guy who was in Photoshop for 15 years and didn't do this. So when you first open Photoshop, it's going to be what's called the Essentials Workspace. And this Essentials Workspace is basically designed to help you learn Photoshop in a way, but it's not the most conducive for actually doing anything in Photoshop, in my personal opinion. But what's really cool about this is if you go to this Essentials Workspace, there's a Learn Photoshop section here. So before we change this over, and I'll show you how to get back to this in a second, this workspace right here shows you different ways that you can create effects or fix photos or what they call the fundamental skills here, which is pretty cool. A little tour within Photoshop. I've never actually done this before. I just saw this when I was going to teach you about this workspace and what we're doing here in Photoshop. What I'm going to do though is right up here, there's a thing that's this little arrow with the drop down, okay? And this actually has all the different possible workspaces that you will have in Photoshop CC 2020. Now, I've got a bunch of workspaces that I've saved and created, which I'll teach you how to do that. But the one that I want you to select, because we are photographers and that's primarily what we're going to be doing, I want you to click this photography workspace. Now, you'd think just by clicking that we're good to go. We got the whole workspace set up. Let's jump and dive in. Well, that's not exactly the case. While I do enjoy this photography workspace that's here, it's not exactly conducive to the best, most efficient workflow in Photoshop. If you see my workspace, this is what my workspace looks like in CC 2020. And I'll show you how I set this up and why I set it up this way and how we get it set up this way. So let's go back to that photography workspace so that you can kind of build your own workspace here. So there's 3 different things in Photoshop that you really need to know. One is a tool, another is a menu, and another is a window or a palette, okay? So over here, these are all the tools that you'll be using in Photoshop, which as we go through this 30 days of learning Photoshop, you're gonna be grabbing different tools over here. So we're not gonna go over every tool individually. Actually, that's probably the hardest way to learn Photoshop. That's a tool. Each tool has its own toolbar. So when you click on a tool, you'll see that the preferences up here for that tool change as you click on that individual tool. So that's a tool, a toolbar. These are menus up here, and these are all your different windows. Okay, so we have the layers window, the channels window, the paths window. These are all things that are included in the photography workspace. If we go to window, we can add different types of windows here. So I want you to go here and just click the properties window. Now, when we do that, it's going to create basically a secondary tool space here. And here is that properties window. Now, the thing is that as we are editing our images in Photoshop, you're going to want this properties window to actually be a lot more prominent and available to you. So this is what I recommend. If you click this and pull this away, it's going to pull it away from that secondary toolbar and give you a menus window. Well, you can create your own workspace here in Photoshop by doing this. There's an adjustments window here. I don't really care for this one because there's multiple ways to get into adjustments. So if I want to remove this from this workspace, I click and drag this out, and then I just exit out and it's gone. But it's not gone forever. If we go to window, right here, you're going to see adjustments. And here's that adjustments window that we just got rid of. So I'm going to take this properties window. I'm going to move it over here next to where it says libraries. Now, in the order of things, I like libraries to be on the right-hand side. And libraries are actually a very wonderful thing in Photoshop. And I'll actually give you a supplemental video underneath this video for today's lesson so that you can get a better understanding of those libraries. But the properties window here, I'm just going to keep this right here. There's another window that I want here, and that's the history window. So I'm going to go to window and then history. Now the history window is awesome because what the history window does is the history window shows me everything that I've done as I'm editing my photo, so that I can go back in the history states, so that if I do something that I don't like, it's easy for me to step backwards in the process. So I'm going to grab this history window and I'm move it right here and pull it right into this properties window here. And I'm going to, when I have this over here, I'm going to move the libraries next to it and the properties in between. And that's what I like having set up right there. There's a navigator window here. That navigator window is really just a window that when you have a document open here, it'll show you a mini window of what that looks like, so that if you're zoomed in, you can see a very small representation of it. It's all right, but I don't really use it that much. So I'm going to take this out of here and I'm going to close it. There are two other windows that I do like to have up there though, and that's my gradients. So I'm going to grab those gradients and pull them up here. And another one is the swatches. So I'm going to grab that and then pull that out here and bring that up here. Okay. Histogram, gradients, swatches, history, properties, libraries, layers, channels, and paths. That's how I like to have my windows set up for efficiency here in Photoshop. This secondary tool space window here, like this one is your different color palettes. You don't really need to have that out. This one is the clone stamp source, which when we get into the clone stamp tool, you might need that, but I don't use it that much. Here is an info tab. I don't use that. And here are your actions. Now actions are very powerful, but we aren't going to be talking about those yet. We're going to be talking about those much later in our 30 days of Photoshop. So you can either leave them there or not. I believe that when we grabbed one of these, I believe it was either the history. I think when we grabbed history, actions came along with it. But we can get to that window another way. So if we just take these out of here and close these out and just go ahead and get rid of them, we don't need those there. So if we go here and we want to get that actions window again, we just click here and now we have the actions. If we wanted to create that secondary toolbar, we just grab that and pull it over here, and now it becomes a secondary toolbar or a secondary space that we can use our actions. Again, actions will come later, so let's not worry about that right now. So these are the windows. We're going to get into these a lot as we progress through. We're going to get into layers. We're even going to get a little bit into channels. We're definitely going to get into properties and history. Libraries you'll see in another segment. When it comes to gradients, we're going to get into that when we talk about adjustment layers, and swatches when we talk about adjustment layers as well. So right now we just need to keep that focus where it is right there, and then we'll come over here to our toolbar. So there's different types of tools that you can use in Photoshop, and there are many different tools. Now you can create a group of tools, or you can just have all of your tools kind of out here at your disposal. Now, the tools that I like to have in here, if we right click on this toolbar, we can say edit toolbar. I like to put my tools in different categories. So when we have our selection tools, those are important. We have our quick selection tool and our magic wand tool. We want to keep those together. Our crop tool and our perspective tool are nice to be kept together, but I also like to have the ruler tool in with them as well. So if I wanted another tool, these are extra tools that aren't actually included in my toolbar. If I wanted another tool, I would just move this up and down and then grab that and pull it up over here. Okay. So let's go ahead and move on down the list here. There's a couple tools that I like to actually group together. The spot healing brush, the patch tool, and content aware move tool are actually all part of what I like to call cleanup tools. So I'm going to grab these cleanup tools and just start putting them all into their same group. What you're going to see here is that this is going to free up some space here on my toolbar because it's bringing all of these together. Okay. The brush tool is very important. The pencil tool, however, not so important. So if we don't need it, pull it over here to the extra tools. We don't necessarily need it in there. The history brush tool and the art history brush tool, I don't really use them that often, so I'm going to bring them over here. If I ever need them, I can use them. The eraser tool, the background eraser tool, and the magic eraser tool, I never use those, so I'm going to move them over here. I do use the gradient tool. It's a very powerful tool. I also use the blur tool and the smudge tool. And let's see here. We have the dodge tool, the burn tool. These are all very important too. The sharpen tool, I don't really use that much. You can actually probably just bring this over here and get rid of it. Typing tools are actually pretty powerful when we do need them, so we'll leave them there. The pen tool, we use it not that often, but it's there. Path selection tool, I don't necessarily need it, so I'm going to bring it out and bring this whole group and pull it over into the extra tools. Now this is my setup. Now you're going to be different. If you look at some of these tools, you're like, Blake, I actually use those tools. Well, then keep them in there. Okay. I'm setting this up for my efficiency so that I don't clutter my tools with things that I don't necessarily need. I do actually use the shape tools quite often when I'm doing some graphic design work, so I am going to bring those shape tools and bring them over. Now, if you don't do a whole lot of graphic design work, these shape tools might actually mean nothing to you, and actually for most photography purposes, you're not going to need them anyway. I actually very rarely ever use them for photography purposes. So this is up to you whether you want to keep these in here or not. I use them mainly in graphic design work, but not necessarily in anything else. So I'm going to leave that the way it is because I like that. Okay, we'll go ahead and press done. Okay, so now I've got my toolbar set up. As I said, anytime you select a tool, this toolbar for that tool is going to change. So this is the brush tool. This is the clone stamp tool. Don't worry about this too much now. We'll get into this later. The next thing I want to get into actually is the edit and then preferences. So in the preferences, this is where we can set Photoshop up to do certain things based on how we work in Photoshop. Here you see the Camera Raw. That is the exact same preferences that you're going to see in Adobe Camera Raw, which we already went through those when we were in Camera Raw on the previous day's lesson. So we aren't going to do that right now. I believe that was day 4. So let's go ahead and just go to General so I can show you how these preferences work. So underneath these general preferences, there might be certain things checked here that you might need or want because you might be new to Photoshop, like the home screen or the new document window. So if you click this is going to give you the old school new document window that I'm used to from Photoshop way back in the day. I don't really like the new document window that Photoshop creates in the newer versions of Photoshop CC, so I want to use that legacy version. So I'm going to just go ahead and make sure that that's checked. Okay, so most of these, if you want to mimic my settings, just go ahead and make sure they're checked. Here, if we go to interface, I actually prefer my interface to be this darker gray, but here, if you want a white Photoshop, wow, that is bright, wow. Or you can go with the second brightest or the darkest. I generally like the middle dark, not the completely dark version of Photoshop, so I tend to use this one. There's other settings that you can change here as well. Your full screen menus, you can change to different colors. Full screen, if you do look at something full screen, you can change that from black or whatever custom color you want. I don't really mess with artboards too much. And then this all pretty much just stays the same for me here. So do my options down below. So then Workspace, I like to have mine set up like this. So if you have this auto collapse iconic panels, that way anytime you open up any of these panels over here that would be on this side, after you open it and click a button, it's automatically going to close it. I don't like that because I like to have things set up so that I might be going into those iconic panels, so I don't want them to close after I open it. So auto show hidden panels, I like to have that selected. Over here, open documents as tabs. I don't like this because when you open a document in Photoshop, instead of it being free floating in your window, it'll open up as a tab. So every image opens up as a tab along the top of Photoshop. Some people like that navigation, but when you're doing composite work, it's better to have free floating windows so you can move in between each image without having to be stuck with tabs. Enable floating document window docking. I like that because if I do have a floating window document here or a photo that's floating around, I can click it, drag it, and dock it up to the top of Photoshop. And I prefer large tabs because my eyes are getting worse as I get older. That's about it for their tools. I don't really do much here in the tools section. History log, don't do much there. File handling, again, I don't really do much here as far as file handling is concerned. Export, not much there. Performance, though, I do. I like to have Photoshop set up so that it takes up my maximum amount of resources, because when I'm in Photoshop, I'm actually not running much of anything else on my computer. So I actually tell Photoshop, hey, you can take 80% of all the resources that are on my computer while you're running. That way, as I'm editing in Photoshop, it maximizes the amount of speed that I have as I'm editing my image. So, I have a 64 gigs of RAM on my computer. So if I were to give Photoshop 100%, that's quite a bit. So I'm just going to give it 80%, which again, 80% of my 64 gigs ends up being about 48 gigabytes worth of RAM. If you have a 16 gig of RAM computer though, 16 is going to be your maximum, which is only 28% of what I'm running here. So I like to have that at about 80%. So I'll just bump that up until it gets to 80%. Here, if you have a graphics card, you want to make sure that your graphics processor is what Photoshop uses, because things will run faster with different types of tools that use your graphics processor instead of just trying to run off of your CPU. Right here under your history and cache, I like to make sure that I have at least at least 60 history states at any given time. What that means is that at any given time, I have 60 different things that can be seen in my history states. And it does slow down Photoshop. So if you don't have a lot of RAM, you might want to keep this at something like 25 to 30. Cache levels. These are kind of hard to explain unless you read what's going on down here, but this tells you how to optimize your cache levels. So the cache levels are the number of cache levels of image data used to improve screen redraw and histogram speed. Choose more cache levels for bigger documents with few layers. Choose fewer cache levels for smaller documents with many layers. So I tend to work on big documents with a lot of layers. So it's like, okay, what do I pick? So I just went with the typical 8 cache here at the highest it could go. Now the cache tile size is the amount of data Photoshop stores or processes at once. Choose bigger tiles for faster processing of documents with large pixel dimensions. So here I would want to go as high as I can go because I'm working with big files with many different layers on them. So right here under scratch disks, if you don't have multiple drives on your computer, you really don't have access to this. Or you can maybe plug in some type of external drive to be the scratch disk. So what a scratch disk is it's basically a place where Photoshop can put any temporary documents that you're working on. So as you're working on things temporarily, it can store them in a space so that it doesn't actually do that on your main hard drive. So I like to put that on one of my bigger drives. You can see here that I have 4 different hard drives on my computer. So I put my scratch disks on my G drive. I could put that on my D drive or my F drive. My C drive is my primary drive though, so I don't want to put that on my C drive. I'll probably just keep those on my D or my G drive because those are my faster hard drives that I have on my computer that actually have quite a bit of space. So if I put it on my G drive, that's where it can store all that temporary stuff so it doesn't lag down my C drive. If you don't have multiple hard drives though, this isn't going to help you too much. Cursors, if you want to change the cursors, you can. I typically don't. Transparency and gamut, I don't really change that at all. I just keep the Photoshop defaults. Pretty much keep the defaults here for units and rulers, except for here under rulers. I like that to be in pixels. So if that was set to inches, I want that to be in pixels. So basically whatever Photoshop defaults here. My guides, my grids, and my slices don't really do anything with that. Plugins don't do anything with that. So everything from units and rulers all the way down, I pretty much don't touch at all. And then I'll press OK. Now here's the other cool thing. In Photoshop, there are many different hotkeys, and I'm going to talk about hotkeys as I work. So if you hear me saying things like Command or Control Alt or Control J, that would be duplicate. I'm going to be saying these things because you memorize these, but at any given time you can go to Edit and then Keyboard Shortcuts, and you can see what all the different keyboard shortcuts are in Photoshop, or you can create your own keyboard shortcuts, which is actually pretty cool. So here, if I were to go to Layer, there is not a keyboard shortcut for flatten image, and that's something that I sometimes use. So I'm going to go to Edit and go to Keyboard Shortcuts. And then in here, under Layer, if I zoom on down to where it says Flatten Layer, we're going to give this a shortcut. Here it is. So here, we can dictate what we want to be the shortcut for flattening the image. That if we were to say Control E, it's going to say, hold on a second. You can't use Control E because that's already being used for merge layers. Are you sure you want to change that? No, I don't. Well, let's try Control period. I actually know that Control and period doesn't actually have a hotkey for it assigned to it. So now if I press Control and period, that is going to be what flattens my image. This stuff right now might not mean much to you, honestly, when you're setting up your workspace and you're setting up Photoshop for efficiency. This, somewhere down the road, you might come in here and do this. As of right now, you probably won't do much with this. I'm just going to be honest. But if you ever do want to create your own shortcuts, as you hear me saying shortcuts for different things that I'm doing in Photoshop, you can make your own shortcuts here in Photoshop. So that's the cool thing. You know, most programs, you're just subject to whatever shortcuts they said are available to you. But Photoshop's like, no. You can make whatever shortcuts you want. Whatever hotkeys you want to make, go ahead. So I'm going to go ahead and press OK. And that will save that out for me. Now, if at any time you want to save out your workspace with all the things that you've done here, if you come right here and you go to this little drop-down window here, you can go ahead and say New Workspace. So if I press New Workspace, it's going to ask me, what do you want in here? Well, panel locations will be saved in this workspace. So anything we did right here is going to be saved in this workspace. Keyboard shortcuts, menus, and toolbars are optional. So if we make this the keyboard shortcuts, the menus, and the toolbars, and then we call this my workspace, I'm just going to call this 30-day. So I know that this is from the 30-day challenge. And then press save. At any given time, I can go to my workspace 30-day. Now I have my own workspace that I use all the time. So I'm going to click this one that says my Blake's PSCC 2020 workspace. It's pretty much exactly what you see here, with the exception of maybe a couple more tools that I didn't delete and a lot of different things that I've put in this toolbar that help me for my workflow and my efficiency in Photoshop. So I'm going to leave it this way, but I'm going to show you one more thing. These menus up here can be really convoluted. You can see there's tons of things up here. So let's say under this filter, under the blur filter, you want that to be a certain color so it stands out more. You can go to edit and go to keyboard shortcuts, and in keyboard shortcuts go to menus. So let's go ahead and close down file, and let's go over to where we said, what was it, filter, and then let's go to where we said blur. Now we can make it so certain things aren't even visible. If I click this eyeball on here or off, then I won't see those blurs at all. But I can make this a certain color. So I can make this, let's say we want to make this red. Okay, so that will make this blur in the filter menu a red color, and we'll press OK. So if I go to filter, look at that. It pops right out. And why does it pop out? It's because we told it to be red. So let's say, you want to make the save as feature blue. We can go to edit, go to menus, and then in here, we're going to go to file, and then where we see save as, we're going to make that color blue. Press OK. So now if I go up to file, you see save as is now colored blue. That can be a phenomenal way to see things really quickly and train your brain to color code the things that you use often in Photoshop. Now, I would leave this subject to things that you don't use very often, but that when you do, you need them, they are highlighted for you. The save as feature, not necessarily something that I need highlighted for me because, I know where that is. But there are other features in here, like some filters that I use that I might want to make bright or a different color so it pops out my face like we saw here with the blur. Okay, so if I wanted to update my workspace, I could say reset Blake's PSCC 2020 workspace. And after I click that, it's going to save all of the things that I just did here into this workspace. See that? So now if I go to a different workspace, which was that 30-day workspace here, we're not going to see that that's color coordinated. But if I go to my 2020 workspace, it's color coordinated. You see that? So anytime you want to update the workspace that you have, you just tell it which one you're currently selected on and then reset so that you can add those things to it. As I said in the beginning of this is not a very fun topic, but it's an important topic. It's such an important topic that I could spend over 20 minutes telling you how to set up your Photoshop for efficiency, for workflow efficiency. Now, workflow is something I'm going to talk about a lot. Efficiency is something I'm going to talk about a lot. A lot of times when people jump into Photoshop, they fail. And the reason why they fail is because they don't know where anything is. Well, you want to know why they don't know where anything is? They didn't take the time to update and make their own workspace. It's just like, well, how would you expect the program to do for you if you're not willing to do anything with it? So that's why I teach you and coach you through the workspace setup before we do anything in Photoshop. So your homework for today is to set up your workspace. I want you to imagine waking up in the morning and you make your oatmeal, your Cheerios, whatever that is, and you go to open up your utensils drawer and the utensils aren't there. They're over on the other side of the kitchen, but you don't know that yet because you don't know where they are. So you go around your kitchen opening all the drawers to find the utensils. You find the utensils. Now you could be satisfied with just leaving those utensils there, or you could say, you know what, I'm going to put those back where they belong. And you could pick up those utensils and put them back where they belong. But if you woke up the next day and everything was changed over again, you'd be frustrated, right? Or what if it was in a different place? You'd be even more frustrated. That's why you need to set up a workspace in Photoshop so that you know where everything is. It would come to a point in that kitchen that you would never want to cook, and then you probably wouldn't be eating as healthy because you wouldn't be making any food. The same thing happens in Photoshop. If you don't set this up for workspace efficiency, you won't want to come in here. If you don't want to come in here, you're not going to be making very good art. That's why we set this up for workspace efficiency. So your homework, set up a workspace, go through Photoshop without having any images open, and just explore and navigate all the different menus. In tomorrow's lesson, we're going to jump into the backbone of Photoshop, and that's layers. The most complicated thing for people to understand, but yet the most important thing for people to understand, Photoshop's layers.